All right, just like any other lecture note day, you do need to have your lecture notes out, and we're going to go through the information. So follow along, make sure you're taking notes, and we're going to go ahead and get started. So the first thing we're going to review is the legend of Midas, the king with the golden touch, which was a Greek myth. And there are many different versions of the story. And there are several reasons why there could be different versions of the story. Remember, myths are sometimes passed down by word of mouth. And so as one person tells the story to another person, some of the details may change. So when you're reading through the story of Midas, you may have noticed a few different details than in other versions of the story of King Midas that you've read before. In the story of King Midas, the king's motive for requesting the golden touch was greed. He wanted to have more. King Midas's motive for the golden touch was greed. King Midas's reason for wanting the golden touch was greed. In this Greek myth, Dionysus, the god of wine, is the one whom Midas asks to get the golden touch from. And at first, Dionysus is kind of not wanting to grant Midas's wish because he wants to make sure that Midas understands what he's actually asking for. So the first thing that Midas turns to gold is a rose, and then he realizes, when he starts to get hungry, that everything he touches, including food and drinks, turn into gold. And the greatest tragedy of all is that he accidentally turns his daughter into a beautiful golden statue. So to get rid of the golden touch, Dionysus tells Midas that he needs to wash in a specific river. And so Midas learns from this story that he was greedy and that he made an unwise request. So again, greed comes up. Midas learns that he was greedy and made an unwise request. All right, so we've already discussed this question. We did this in the last class. This man was a blind poet during Greek's Dark Age who wrote the epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey. Go ahead and say it out loud. I'm going to hope that you got the answer correct. And again, you'll say the answer for this one out loud. These stories are designed to teach lessons that often used animals that acted and talked like humans as the main characters. Go ahead and say it out loud. Fables is the correct answer. All right. What are the many accomplishments that were made in the areas of math and science in ancient Greece? I'm going to say this now, and I'm going to say this as we go through the slides. Make sure you know these, so make sure you're taking good notes. You're going to take notes on Archimedes, Euclid, Pythagoras, Eratosthenes, Aristarchus, and Hippocrates. So we'll go through each slide and make sure you take good notes on all of those things. What is unusual about the architecture of the Parthenon? The architecture of the Parthenon actually has several optical illusions in its design. So things that normally you wouldn't actually think about. There are humps in the steps to make the steps look flat. The pillars are slightly larger at the bottom than they are at the top, and that makes them look straight and true throughout the whole, from far away. All right, here's a new heading, Math and Science. Please take a moment to write that down. We're going to look at different inventions by different people in the areas of math and science. And our first scientist is going to be Archimedes. Archimedes is famous for creating the lever and the complex pulley. When you think of a lever, think of a pair of scissors. And when you think of a pulley, think of an old-time well and someone putting a bucket down in the well and then using a rope to pull it back up. So both the lever and the pulley help us move heavy things. So Archimedes is responsible for coming up with the lever and the complex pulley. Our next scientist is going to be Euclid. And Euclid is very famous for creating his geometry book. When you get to either 8th grade or to high school and you take geometry, you will actually be using a book that is based on the ancient Greek Euclid's geometry. Geometry is important because it's necessary for making buildings, for measuring different shapes, and all of those things are important for geometry. Pythagoras is our next scientist, and he created a theory about triangles. And he said, well, go ahead and write this down. Then we'll go to the next slide, and I'll help you understand a little bit more what his theory means. And if you're confused, go ask Miss Meyer. Because remember, I'm the history teacher, she's the science teacher. No, I'm the history teacher, she's the math teacher. So Pythagoras created a theory about triangles. Now this is Pythagoras' theory. And what he said was that in order to get when you have a right angle triangle, in order to get the length of the long side, you add together the square of the two shorter sides. So let's go back. In order to find the blue square, you add together the purple side squared plus the orange side squared, and then you'll get the blue side. But the most important thing you need to know about Pythagoras is he created a theory about triangles. All right, you should have that written down. And now we're going to go on to Eratosthenes. And Eratosthenes created the lines of latitude and longitude that we have on our map today. And latitude and longitude are important for people who are traveling. This was used by sailors when they were exploring the world. So latitude goes up and longitude goes around the world. Eratosthenes also used Euclid's geometry to help him discover what the circumference of the earth is, or how big around the earth is. So back before Jesus was born, Eratosthenes, an ancient Greek, figured out how big the earth was. This is without a telescope, without a satellite in space. He simply used his observations and math to very accurately discover what the circumference of the earth actually was. So that's Eratosthenes. Our next guy is Aristarchus, and Aristarchus said that the sun was actually the center of the universe. When you go outside, you would think that the earth is the center of the universe, because if you watch, the sun appears to be what moves around the earth, not the earth moving around the sun. And it actually took thousands of years for everyone to end up believing like Aristarchus does. And so Aristarchus, the sun is the center of the universe. Our next scientist is Hippocrates, and Hippocrates did research in medical treatments, and he believed that diseases and sicknesses weren't caused by people being cursed by the gods, but instead there were natural reasons why you got a cold or had a fever. And he encouraged people to wash their hands and eat a healthy diet in order to stay healthy. Hippocrates is famous for medical treatments. And today, doctors reference Hippocrates by taking a Hippocratic oath when they graduate from college. And so they're saying, like Hippocrates, they will do no harm. Couple questions for review. What was Euclid's contribution to ancient Greece? Go ahead and say it out loud. I hope you said the geometry book. And what did the Greeks believe about developing the human body? The Greeks believed that developing the body was just as important as developing the mind. And so the Greeks thought athletics were very important. The Greeks believed that athletics were very important. The Greeks believed that athletics were very important. I'm sure you all know this, but the Olympic Games come from the ancient Greeks. The Olympic Games were held in honor of the gods, and some of the modern Olympic events can be traced back to Olympic events that the Greeks had. Things like mostly the track and field events, things like the discus throwing or the javelin throwing or the foot races, those can be traced back to ancient Greece. In ancient Olympics, they earned crowns instead of medals, and only men could participate. Women were not allowed to participate, and married women weren't allowed to attend the Olympics. All right, I'm going to skip a couple slides here. Music. How did the Greeks feel about music? Well, they thought it was one of the greatest forms of art. There were two Greek gods that were over music. There was Apollo and the Muses. So Apollo and the Muses were the gods of the music and the arts. Apollo we learned about last week, and he was the god of music and the sun and archery. And then the Muses, if you've ever seen the movie Hercules, the four ladies who do most of the singing in the movie, they say, "We're the Muses." And they're the goddesses of music and poetry. And so that's kind of where we get our word music from. So the Greek gods, Apollo and the Muses, are the gods of music. We're going to go ahead and end here. We will pick up with art and architecture next class that we have together, and I will be here to wrap up things for you before the quiz. So make sure you take good notes, and I will see you in class when I come back from my trip.